Throughout history, there have been multiple survival stories of people being stranded on isolated islands. These cases were usually shipwrecked survivors who had to live there while they waited to be rescued. But this one is a bit different. In 1952, Tom Neale chose to live alone on a remote island, away from civilization, and he did this at the age of 50 years old. In his early years, Tom joined the New Zealand Royal Navy and developed a huge interest in exploration. After leaving the Navy, he visited multiple islands, met new people, and took various jobs to support himself. In 1943, while working as a clerk in a small store in Rarotonga Island, he met Robert Dean Frisbee. Robert mentioned a little island called Suwarrow Island. It's located in the South Pacific not far from Rarotonga. The Suwarrow Island is part of the Cook Islands, and it is situated in the northern area. The island itself is a coral atoll with over 20 small islets. Robert describes this place as one of the most beautiful locations he visited, and even lived there for a brief period of time. Fascinated by his story, Tom wanted to go see the island with his own eyes. He got the chance to witness it in 1945. The ship that he was on made a quick stop over at Suwarrow Island to drop off some supplies for the New Zealand coast watchers. At first glance, he was mesmerized by the beauty of the island. White sands, clear waters, and palm trees. He knew it was the perfect place for him. Now, Tom didn't want to go there to challenge himself and live like a struggling survivor. Instead, he had everything planned, and he was well prepared. He saved up money to stock up on food supplies and bought necessary survival tools. His ambitious plan quickly spread throughout town. Some residents even asked if they could come with him, but Tom politely said no and wanted to go there alone. After years of preparation, he finally made the trip in 1952. He boarded a ship and headed his way to Suwarrow Island. He stayed on the largest islet located on the northern area, Anchorage Island. Despite turning down multiple people who wished to come with him, he did bring along two companions, his two beloved cats. Upon arrival, there were remnants of materials from previous habitation. The island was used during the Second World War. New Zealand coast watchers were stationed here and stayed until the end of the war. Thus, there were things that were left behind: a rundown shack, a hut with water tanks, damaged pier, and a broken boat. There were also wild pigs and chickens that roamed around. During the first week, he repaired the rundown shack and made it his home. Even though he stayed on a remote island, everything was well organized. He had a table where he ate and a dedicated cooking area with proper tools. For general hygiene, he boiled water and used it to dip his bedsheet to clean it. Also, to reduce his laundry, he only wore a loincloth and a sun hat, which was also ideal since the temperature can get really hot, especially in the summer. Despite being skinny, food supplies were not a problem on the island. Most of his diet consisted of fish, fruits, and vegetables. Sometimes he would eat the canned goods he brought along. Spear fishing was his method to catch seafood. He would also collect coconuts using a long stick he crafted, and even built a garden to grow vegetables. Gardening was a big challenge for him. The wild pigs were constantly ruining the vegetation. Eventually, he had to hunt them to prevent any more damage. Tom developed a repetitive routine. During the day, he spent the time cleaning, preparing food, and maintaining his garden. Then, every evening before sunset, he would make a bowl of tea and watch the sun go down. After 10 months, two unexpected visitors arrived on the island, not knowing anyone was living there. When they first encountered Tom, they thought he was a survivor who got stranded on the island waiting to be rescued. But as they looked around, they were astonished how orderly the place was. Even though Tom wanted to be alone and away from civilization, he still welcomed the two with open arms and offered them food. They stayed the night, then left the following morning. Being in the South Pacific Ocean, the number one threat was the weather. The area is known to have seasonal hurricanes. For instance, on one occasion, after he completed repairing the pier, a huge hurricane hit the island and destroyed all the work he had done. Other things were also damaged. His garden, the shack, and some of the tools went missing. Still, he endured through this, repaired most of the damage, and continued on his routine. In 1954, a very unfortunate thing happened. He injured his back while doing some work, Initially, he thought it was just a minor muscle strain and that the pain would go away with time. However, as more days passed by, it grew worse and it reached the point that he could barely walk. The pain was so bad that he spent most of the time laying on bed inside his shack. He would only get up to eat or use the washroom. It turned out that it was more than just a minor muscle strain. He suffered a severe arthritis on his lower back, and it became impossible for him to do any more strenuous tasks. He was borderline bedbound and was in need of professional help. Luckily, just days after he experienced this severe pain, there were 2 new visitors who arrived on the island. They were on their way to Samoa and stopped by the island to get some rest. Much like the first visitors, they were surprised about how well kept the place was and assumed someone was living on the island. As they investigated further, they entered the shack, and inside, they saw Tom lying on bed in severe pain. The 2 visitors left the island to notify the government, and a ship was sent to remove him from the island, then straight to the hospital for treatment. He wasn't pleased being back to civilization. After getting better, he wanted to go back to the island as soon as possible. However, the government forbade him to do so. If he chose to rebel and go back to the island, they would no longer be responsible to him if anything happened. Since Tom didn't want to risk it, he took a job at a warehouse and lived an ordinary life much like everyone else. By 1956, he got married to Sarah Marsters and had 2 kids. Even though he had a family, he still wanted to return to the island. In 1960, against the will of the government, he sailed back to Suwarrow Island and lived there alone. His second stay was a bit different. More people knew about his stay on the island, and this time some people voluntarily went there to visit him. Then a year later in 1961, an old friend of his went to the island to check up on him after multiple rumors circulated that he had died. Keep in mind, during this time Tom was 59 years old and had a history of severe lower back pain, so everyone close to him was worried for him. Good thing though, Tom was doing well and had not encountered any major injuries. His stay on the island lasted until 1963. Near where he was staying, there was a surge of pearl divers going in and out. The constant visits from them became too much for him, and he eventually left the island and went back to Rarotonga for the second time. After returning to civilization in 1964, he wrote a book called An Island to Oneself, the story of 6 years on a desert island. He described in depth his everyday life on the island. The book was then published in 1966. However, this book only illustrated his 2 stays on the island. Tom decided to go back to the island for a 3rd time in 1967. Not much information is known on his 3rd stay since he didn't include those events in his book. But the 3rd time was the longest period he stayed on the island, from 1967 to 1977, a sum of 10 years. The reason he left in 1977 was because he had stomach cancer and was in need of treatment. 8 months later, he died from the illness at the age of 75. Tom's story became well known and captured many. In an interview before his death, he was asked if he was a hermit as many labeled him to be. He clarified this and stated, "I'm not a hermit. Hermits don't like people, but I do. I just live here because it suits me. I can do what I want, when I want, without being beholden to anyone. I'm free."